Tantalus Entertainment presents the Killer Score Podcast.
Hello, welcome to Killer Score, the podcast that covers cult classic films with fantastic and phenomenal soundtracks, where we talk trivia, all sorts of little factoids, and about the composers of the film themselves. Today, we will be led by Rich Eckert for the film today. It is The Great Mouse Detective. In this case, I am the only person in the group who has not seen the film. I am, of course, your host, Daulton Morrison of Sick Jacket Man. You can find me on YouTube and Twitter under that same handle. I'm going to pass it off to the others now.
Hey there, hi there, ho there. This is Richard Eckert with Richard's Rad Voices of YouTube under Richard Eckert or on Twitter under Rich F. Eckert. Voice actor, film nerd, general pain in the ass, and your friendly neighborhood Disney fan. I am the one who acknowledges that they are the company we love and love to hate. Passing it off to my next co-host,
Erin Murray of witchandcrafts.com, as well as facebook.com/witchandcrafts. Link in the description. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram under Nire Murray. That's N-I-R-E. Basically first name spelled backwards. And I am here. And I also love The Great Mouse Detective. Am I permitted to start?
of course.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so with The Great Mouse Detective, I watched it when I was a kid, and I just fell in love with the movie, and you can also kind of blame that movie for my obsession with Victoriana and Sherlock Holmes.
And that is obsession with a capital O there, people. Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Any path that leads to Victorian trivia, she will take the wheel and steer it over there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you ever want to hear me go on a rant about corsetry, just let me know. Just send me a DM or something. Just don't send any creepy DMs.
Yeah. Now, I know this one's a bit of a cult classic when it comes to Disney films, but I don't know if I've ever brought this up on the podcast before, but I actually have less of an experience with Disney than most people do. I didn't watch a ton of Disney films as a child. For the most part, I watched... the only one I watched quite frequently when I was very young was I wore out a few films. One of them was The Lion King. I watched
Great
a lot
movie.
of The Lion King as a kid, and as I got a little older, it was Lilo and Stitch that I watched frequently. And I mean, now it's been integrated into Disney, even though it's not really a Disney film. But I've seen a lot of The Nightmare Before Christmas. But Disney hasn't been as big of my childhood as it was with others. Honestly, the film I watched the most as a kid were the Tim Burton and Schumacher Batman films. Those are what I really wore out a lot as a child, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Let's see. Campy sensibilities, check. Propensity for love and hate style of jokes, check. Jury's still out on the protruding nipples, but that's not really a
Gothic
avenue.
architecture
Far
and Gothic theming in general.
on the other end of the spectrum with how much Disney has played into our childhoods, I devoured Disney content as a child.
Same here. As for me, I was basically raised on, like, Disney and just, like, animated films in general. And of course, my mom can contest to this. My favorite thing growing up, and still is Winnie the Pooh.
A little less Disney, but more Pixar, but Toy Story was the first full-length movie I ever saw in my lifetime, and from there, it was just VHS after DVD of Disney movies. You name it, I probably saw it when I was age 4 up to 12.
Same.
Hell, one of my favorite movies, and here's out of left field for you, from that time was probably Oliver and Company, even though it is
kind of forgotten.
It's forgotten, yes, but I do kind of like the fact that it nailed New York from an artistic standpoint.
Yeah.
And I like Billy Joel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so do I.
like,
He puts on a great show.
he puts on a great show, and for someone who was only voice acting for that movie, he did a really good job as Dodger in that. But that's neither here nor there, because we are going to be discussing The Great Mouse Detective upon seeing it, simply for the reason that it is lower on the radar as far as Disney movies goes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
in spite of its success during the time of its release. This movie's legacy is pretty insane when it comes to everything. As everyone very well knows among here, Walt Disney's death had a really big negative impact on the company's success. They put out numerous financial disappointments, and
Yeah.
even the ones that were more successful had less in the way of critical success.
Yeah, take for example the Dark Crystal, which Disney basically kind of like buried for the most part because of how much of an embarrassment the film was for them financially. Like, the film spent so much time in development and cost so much money. It got in big star names like John Hurt, and they still like did not.
I mean, Black Cauldron?
Black Cauldron, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, Dark Crystal's Jim Henson.
Yeah, whoops. Scratch that. But that was also a financial disaster. But no, Black Cauldron was just like a huge flop for them, and they kind of buried it.
Yeah, it was a box office bomb, and the thing is, there are still people who are campaigning to this day to make Princess Leonwi a Disney princess.
Yeah. Honestly, funny enough, the longest lasting legacy of the Black Cauldron doesn't even exist anymore, which was the Disney Magic Castle tour, the ride from Japan, which was a walk-around attraction where you got like taken down into the dungeons of the Disney castle where all the villains tried to like attack the guests, culminating in a finale that involved the Black Cauldron, specifically with the Horned King trying to summon an army of demons, and one audience member, usually a young boy, being chosen to wield the sword from the film to vanquish the Horned King.
Shame, because
I love that concept. I wish I had been on that.
Yeah, it was really cool and really unique, and it always had like a decent attraction and stuff like that, and the upkeep wasn't very expensive. The only reason the attraction got decommissioned is in the 2010s, I believe it was, when they decommissioned it, early 2010s. That's around the time Japan was having more earthquake troubles. So
The
stuff,
Fukushima disaster.
yeah. So stuff had to. A lot of companies were forced to like rebuild stuff with like earthquake like safety measures, and the amount of stuff they would have had to do for that attraction was so expensive they had to decommission it basically.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, in spite of not necessarily being a terrible movie in its own right, The Black Cauldron really did mark a real declining point for Disney.
Yeah, it didn't help that the company focused a lot in that period. Specifically, the 1980s was their really down period.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't really resurge until the end of the 80s, but probably part of the problem with that was they focused so much on live action stuff in that period, and most of their live action fare was just not very good.
And just forgettable in general.
Yeah.
Because I remember I read a whole article from Nerdist years ago about they called it the dark era of Disney, which was like the mid 70s to 1989.
Yeah.
Didn't really resurge until The Little Mermaid. That's when we got the Disney Renaissance.
Yeah, because in the article it mentioned like all these live action Disney movies that basically were almost meant to give children nightmares.
Oh, you're telling me that people aren't like out there campaigning for stuff for Mr. Boogedy? Or Candle Shoe?
I was moreover talking about things like The Watcher in the Woods and Something Wicked This Way Comes.
That's good though.
That is a
good.
good
That's good,
movie.
I'm saying it's a good movie. I'm just saying that it was like this was like a forgotten gem of that era.
Although
honestly, I could do a whole video just talking about how Something Wicked This Way Comes is probably one of the probably one of the books with the biggest amount of like good adaptations, because like the animated version of Something Wicked This Way Comes is good, and so is the
live action.
Yeah, and it's like, when does it happen that much that like one property just gets consistently good adaptations?
Like, thank you, Daulton, for reminding me of one of many sources of my nightmares. And thank you also for reminding me of The Little Mermaid, because that brings us to today's subject, which, by popular demand, is The Great Mouse Detective.
Hey.
Because...
Hey, thank you for everyone who voted on the Twitter poll.
Yeah. We'll probably post up some more Twitter polls in the future. We've got some theme months coming up in the next, after February, but we've kind of already mostly figured those out, I believe. But if any of us are like on the fence about a subject for that month, we will put another Twitter poll. So make sure to follow the Twitter and on the other feeds we have, so you can keep up to date with what's going on with the podcast.
So, getting it back to the history of Disney, it's funny that you mentioned The Little Mermaid, Daulton, because this movie served as something of a victory dance, a victory celebration for two men in particular who would go on to, for better and worse, make history for Disney. One is Jeffrey Katzenberg, who you could probably write a whole book on in the best and worst ways.
Oh, yeah.
But
Is the other Michael Eisner? Is the other Michael Eisner?
No, but...
Lassenberg?
No.
Oh.
I am talking, actually, about two directors. So make that three men. Fix it in post. So, two men in particular helmed the direction of this movie. One was John Musker and the other Ron Clements, the latter of which is directly responsible for the kicking off of the Disney Renaissance, arguably this, but also, especially and definitely, with The Little Mermaid.
Yeah.
He directed that and Treasure Planet, which criminally underrated. Everyone should see that after this. Take that away from there. In fact, if either of you haven't seen Treasure Planet, I
have not.
Neither have I.
Yes! Alright.
Well, you got a thing for another month.
But let's get back to today's subject, because I have a terrible habit of joining you in taking us away from the main topic.
Isn't that part of the fun of this podcast, though?
Probably. So, Katzenberg and Clements came across a British series of children's books called Basil of Baker Street, and it tells the story of the title character, a mouse detective living in a scaled-down Kingdom of England consisting of mice and other rodents. And yes, in case anyone is somehow not aware, Basil of Baker Street is very much a child-friendly and scaled-down version of Sherlock Holmes, to the point where the title character's mouse hole is actually implied to be directly located in
Baker Street. 221B Baker Street.
You are a nerd.
Yes.
In Sherlock Holmes's estate. And this movie's legacy is as important to Disney's success as it is somehow overlooked in the grand scheme of things. I'm not sure if this is down to whether or not people don't like this movie, or due to the fact that Disney has so many big properties to its name that this one just got swept up in that veritable tsunami.
Yeah, I think it's mostly the latter, that and the fact that, like, this one I've noticed tends to get overlooked when it comes to, like, Disney merchandise stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I have never seen any Great Mouse Detective merchandise ever.
Yeah, I went to the Disney parks in 2013. I went down to Florida for a school trip, and I saw all sorts of properties represented, including, like, Nightmare Before Christmas, that's when they really started to push it again, realizing, oh wait, we can use, like, we have this great property from Touchstone that we can market that has, like, a huge audience. And also, I saw a decent amount of stuff from, like, Stitch and all these other franchises, but, like, I do not recall seeing Great Mouse Detective stuff, but I've never heard anything but good things about this movie.
Rightfully so, as it actually takes a much more, comparatively speaking, adult and somewhat darker edge when it comes to its story and its characters. Not necessarily the fact that, oh, this is like PG-13 Disney or anything. It's still very much general audience aimed Disney film, but it goes out of its way to very much be a kidified Sherlock Holmes mystery story, complete with Basil being probably one of the most uncharacteristically anti-heroic characters in the Disney canon. Like, when I say that he is a mouse Sherlock Holmes, I mean it, complete with his antisocial tendencies, his arrogance, and his
dear stalker.
Yep. And also with his general aversion to anything but solving the case. And it really is excellent in that regard. But also, one thing that I want both of you to be excited for, more so Daulton, because this will be his first time, is one of the greatest Disney villains of that decade, Professor Ratigan.
Oh, nice.
Let me tell you something. As you both know, as an aspiring voice actor of some talent, I'd like to think, I am very, very, very much not a fan of celebrity stunt casting for major animated films, mainly because there was a time when Disney actually put theatrical and voice actors in their productions. Aladdin's voice actor was a Broadway actor. Like, he wasn't big.
No, the thing he was literally most well known for that was some, like, you know, ABC sitcom appearances.
Yeah, and that works for animation because animation is, by its very nature, a more theatrical medium.
Yeah.
And then the whole thing with Aladdin happened, and I'm not going to take away the fact that Robin Williams gave a tour de force performance.
No, but he also literally got in a lawsuit with Disney because they specifically did not honor his wishes and put his name on the poster for the advertising when he specifically said, hey, don't do that.
Which is strange considering the one and only master of horror himself, Vincent Price, was chosen as the voice of Ratigan. And I don't even want to tell you how he does, because you got to see this for yourself, man.
Well, Vincent Price is a darling, and he was one of the greatest, like, actors, in my opinion, to ever walk this earth, and one of the best people to ever walk this earth. But Price wasn't exactly adored by the mainstream, because he was a genre actor, for one, and for two, he was incredibly progressive for his time, which did not fly in for most of the time he was alive.
So many actors seem to have suffered for not being complete monsters back then. Think about it. Eartha Kitt had a similar problem because she was helping LGBTQ
Same for Price.
people
Same for Price.
during the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, same for Price.
And that just speaks volumes about how warped things are when it comes to the public and to the Hollywood system. But there is one person who agrees with me on this being one of his finest moments, and I'll tell you who that is after the movie.
Okay.
But one thing I wanted to bring up before we continue is that the score for this movie was done by the one, the only Henry Mancini.
Oh, nice. Mancini.
Yes. Those of you who don't recognize the name will recognize the iconic Pink Panther theme song, and also a lot of incidental jazz scores for what one might call more highbrow efforts, such as the iconic progenitor of most award bait songs, Moon River from Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh my god.
Great song, but I had to get that joke in,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah. Another thing I was going to mention is during one of the scenes later in the movie, take a look at the animation style, because this is actually an early example of Disney using computer animation, because it's not very, like, it's kind of subtle, because it's only in a few scenes here and there.
And it is gorgeous.
Everyone knows the Disney Renaissance for using computer animation for its, well, obviously animation. But the first one to actually start using it, I believe, was, what, The Rescuers Down Under?
That and Aladdin, because you're forgetting the Cave of Wonders.
The Cave of Wonders, yes, but the first one to use computer animation at all, I'm pretty sure, was The Rescuers Down Under.
Oh yeah. Oh
There
yeah.
were, like, flight scenes and that kind of thing.
The flight scenes and all the shots of McLeach's truck.
Yeah.
That big giant backhoe looking beast.
Yeah.
So, with all that pedigree behind it, I want to bring this movie back to the Disney consciousness because there's so much I want to discuss about it after the screening. So, are my co-hosts ready?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Here we are, beginning the screening now. And we are back after screening The Great Mouse Detective for the first time to Daulton, and for me, about the third or fourth time. As with my childhood and early adulthood, I adored this movie while viewing it for the podcast. Just as I remembered, its animation was fantastic, its writing and characterization was on point, and Henry Mancini's score was beautifully on point and harrowing and thrilling. But before we get to first impressions, I'd like to see how Erin feels about revisiting this movie.
I still love this movie. I hadn't watched it in a few years, but it's still as great as I remember it being. Of course, one of the things that we mentioned was while watching was, of course, things like animation, pacing. We love the transitional scenes.
Most of which involved the juxtaposition of the human world during that time and place with that of
The mouse world.
Mousestopian.
The mouse world.
Yes. And all of the parallels that it had to the Sherlock Holmes stories that inspired it. Mm-hmm. But before we continue on about all of the cool stuff about this movie, which there are several points I'd like to bring up, Daulton, I would like your first impressions, my friend.
Yeah, it was really fun. Definitely a great love letter to Sherlock Holmes and the like. I don't know how close it is to the book series it's based off of, but it was a lot of fun. Great, nice breezy film. Not really a dull moment in it, and it's just a nice short movie that's got a lot going on in a short period of time, but like uses every minute to its advantage. And climax was a lot of fun. I'm pretty sure it's a reference to Castle of Cagliostro.
Yep.
Yes. I mean,
what isn't?
If you have a clock tower fight, it's a Castle of Cagliostro reference. Let's face it.
I mean, that movie probably has the best clock tower fight, but this one is really up there. And we will talk about the climax of this movie later, so I can mark a spoiler light moment in this particular episode.
Yeah, it's hard to top. Hard to top any Lupin stuff when it comes to action sequences. So
True. But we have a lot of points to cover. something I mentioned at the end of the intro to this episode was that there was someone who agreed with me personally about this being Vincent Price's best role. Do you want to know who that person is, Dalton?
Who's that? Who's that?
Vincent Price.
Oh, wow.
He has gone on record as saying that this is probably the most fun he's ever had doing something, and considers Ratigan to be his absolute favorite role. And there are even rumors out there that he took lower scale for this. Like, he didn't care necessarily how much he got paid, and he wasn't expecting to be paid like a top billed actor would for this sort of thing, like you'd imagine in modern animated movies. He just jumped on board with this, and there is a ton of behind the scenes footage on YouTube you could find of him just having the biggest, dumbest grin on his face while singing both musical numbers dedicated to Ratigan.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, even though this movie isn't necessarily a musical, the songs that they do have are great.
Yeah, I was about to say, there's only, like, what, 2 musical numbers in this?
3.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
3. I'm counting the goodbye song.
Oh, yeah. True.
Where you on the record.
Yeah.
On the record player.
I gotta say, what I really liked about Harry Mancini's score is and I imagine this was intentional, it reminded me a lot of, like, adventure serial scores.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, the kind of stuff that inspired, like, Indiana Jones, for example.
Oh yeah. I did enjoy the score for this. There was a joke that we made through one of the musical numbers that were like, oh, this must have been an awakening for a lot of people.
Yep, and that is something I introduced. I said, ladies and gentlemen, the furry awakening for every young furry preteen or kid ever who saw this. And that, of course, is the unforgettable burlesque number, Let Me Be Good to You, with Miss Kitty.
Yeah, good stuff. You can't resist a good showgirl number.
Fun fact, by the way, about that particular number, you know who they were originally considering for Miss Kitty's singing voice before her tour schedule made that impossible?
Oh boy, who was that?
Madonna.
Yeah, that checks. That checks.
I know a lot of people are gonna say, like, what to that, but remember, she did some songs.
She was getting a lot of movie stuff at this point, you know.
This was around the time she did Evita, I think.
No. Evita was the 90s.
Yeah.
But
oh, okay, I was wrong.
Something I was gonna bring up specifically as a parallel to this movie to prove that it isn't too far-fetched is the fact that she did a lot of songs as Breathless Mahoney in Dick Tracy.
True. So we know she can do jazz-inspired numbers, yeah.
Oh yeah, like, she has the voice for it.
Mm-hmm.
And
honestly, probably one of the better parts about the Dick Tracy movie is her musical numbers in those.
I like the lighting and stuff in that.
Yeah, the lighting and cinematography is good in the movie. Shame about the everything else.
That movie would have been a 6 out of 10 for me had they made an effort to have Dick Tracy be a character.
Yeah, and if they had actually, like, you could tell they wanted the comic booky tone of the Dick Tracy stuff, but they also didn't want to stick with it, and they aped Burton's Batman movie way too hard.
Complete with that theme. Like, there's a funny Todd in the Shadows joke where he portrays Danny Elfman doing the score for Dick Tracy by taking the Batman theme, scribbling over a bunch of new music notes and saying, okay, that's good.
Yeah. You know, this is one little factoid for composing I always love to throw out there to show how much of a fucking genius Danny Elfman is. Do you know when he composed the Batman theme?
When?
In his head when he was on a plane.
Whoa.
So he was just casually traveling on a plane and it was like, Oh yeah, there we go.
Like,
He's like literally tapping on stuff on the plane to like get the
I do
beats
that.
out of his head. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Oh yeah.
And like as Erin said, that tracks.
It tracks. I mean, I can't really do that on a plane because there's a thing. Well, I mean, there is airplane mode on phones nowadays, but like if I have a little melody or something in my head, I'm just gonna record my phone and transpose it later.
Yeah, but the fact that he's able to do that on something as distracting as a plane is impeccable.
I mean, you gotta really fine tune your focus there.
Oh God, yeah.
I think that just speaks to his talent and how in tune he is. Like, it's kind of a shame because I feel like Danny Elfman kinda, or at least in the mid-2000s and the 2010s, he kind of felt like he was phoning it in a bit.
Yeah, like I feel it's less like Elfman phoning it in and more like studios we're probably telling him, give us a score like that, or just give us a Danny Elfman score.
That tracks.
Yeah.
Because like he was with all the Burton shit at the time, so.
So, back to the movie. Yeah, Henry Mancini's score is just great. Like Daulton said, it has a very pulpy, adventurous feel. And I especially love the horn sections most of all. Like, this movie loves trumpets.
Yes.
And it uses them to really accentuate the hectic stuff going on screen. Which, speaking of which, the action scenes for a Disney movie especially are really, really good.
Yeah.
We are, of course, getting to the climax eventually, but the bar brawl scene is great, where they're fiddling a lot with pianos. The flight chase, where they've rigged the balloons to chase Ratigan's blimp. Like,
And of course, the climax of the film with the clock tower scene in Big Ben.
yep. We will discuss that further, but there is one thing I was talking... It's funny because Daulton and I were having a little bit of a text chat a couple of days ago where I might timestamp this in the YouTube version of this and edit that into the video, where Daulton actually said to me, I'm so tired of detective characters who are just morose and don't enjoy their jobs or are like just gritty and have no characterization beyond tortured.
You see, I feel like everyone takes a little too much from the police procedural when it comes to like characterization for like detective characters nowadays.
Definitely.
They don't. Sadly, my favorite type of detective character and story is not as present anymore. One which is like the incidental meddler who happens to have great detective knowledge. Your Miss Marples, you know, and because I'm a big sucker for a character who everyone underestimates, who's like incredibly talented.
That's why I think the movie Brick works so well. Have you ever seen that?
No, I have not actually seen Brick.
I believe Rian Johnson did that one.
Yes, he did.
I love that movie, and honestly, I think that might be a candidate for this show.
Yeah, and tying into Rian Johnson, that's why I love Knives Out, because Knives Out clearly took more influence from the Agatha Christie style detective story with the great detective, the eccentric, like the very eccentric, unfailingly polite, weird person who everyone's confused by. Your Hercule Poirot. Yeah.
And here, because this is a Sherlock Holmes adaptation, they kind of split the difference between archetypal detectives. Because one thing we were talking about, like we brought, Daulton and I were in that chat that I mentioned. We were talking about Agatha Christie detectives and all that, and then I said, "Oh, there is going to be one detective you're going to like after the podcast," and that brings us to Basil of Baker Street, who I honestly adore as a Disney hero because he's so unlike the chipper or polished or adventurous type of hero that you would see from the likes of, say, Belle or Aladdin or
Any Disney hero or princess.
yes, because the thing is, Basil is both a good-hearted character and an egocentric jackass.
Yeah, and I gotta just say props to Harry Mancini, because I'm looking at the dude's filmography scores and stuff. It's all over the place, and no wonder he was so good at composing this. One of his most famous compositional works, aside from the Pink Panther theme, was the theme to an old detective series called Peter Gunn.
Oh, right, I forgot about Peter Gunn. Daulton, thank you, because this is essential. It does have the same energy.
And talk about range with his stuff, because you know what else he did in the 80s? He did the score for Mommy Dearest,
Oh.
which is very minimalist, but very effective.
Very effective.
And the same year, like a year before this came out, because this came out I looked it up, it came out in 86. You know what he did in 85? He did the score for another cult classic, although in this case, a horror film. He did the score for Life Force.
Oh,
The Tobe Hooper space vampire movie.
yeah.
Yeah. That's the same guy.
Holy shit, that was a lot of excitement, but understandable, because Mancini was just a musical wizard. He was...
Oh, yeah. And, you can see here, he didn't just compose for, he also composed for TV shows. He did that 90s Tom and Jerry movie. He actually also did a bunch of TV show themes, including Newhart, What's Happening, the NBC Mystery Movie, which, by the way, where Columbo came from. That's where Columbo came from.
Yeah. So, getting a bit back to Basil Baker Street's characterization, from the outset, you can tell that he's good at his job and he's eager to do it if he's getting to be the guy who has the last laugh. But he's also got some vices, like Sherlock Holmes did. He's antisocial. He's
hyper-focused.
He's hyper-focused. He's kooky, but not in a realistic way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me how they got across his eccentricities without dialing it up.
Oh, yeah.
And, he's a guy who's focused more on, do I get the job done, than do I get everyone's approval.
Yeah, and given how much this takes from British culture to tie it into another episode of ours, I almost wonder if they took a little influence from the characterization of the Doctor, because there's moments of his that feel very, very Fourth Doctor, where it's like, hey, let me do my work. Oh, what's going on? I don't know. Just hey, I'm trying to focus on this thing. Missing the valley for the trees.
And you get the sense, I like too, that he doesn't seem malicious in any of it. He just is not good with people.
Yeah.
I think the epitome of this is when Olivia, the girl that they're trying to help save her father, is kidnapped, and Dawson, the Dr. Watson XB, who basically kicks everything off by being the sweetest guy ever, is crying, and Basil just comes up and he's struggling to try and comfort it, and all he can get out is, I say, Dawson, old chap.
Yeah.
Clearly not knowing what to say to get him out of his funk.
Yeah. He strikes a great balance between the eccentric great detectives who usually can have acceptable social interactions with people, and the actual Sherlock Holmes who was terrible at social interactions with people.
Yeah. Because another thing that they got across in adaptation is kind of I don't use it, we mentioned the term arrogance earlier, and it's not meant to be intentional on Sherlock's part. It's just how he is, and the point where Olivia meets Basil, And Basil's just like, shouldn't your mother know?
And then she just reveals that her mother, let's say she's probably
dead.
Yeah, she's probably dead.
It's also very Hercule Poirot, because there's a lot of Hercule Poirot stories where he's like, nah, none of this this is all above this is I'm above this, I'm not going to get involved in this, and someone just says something that makes Poirot go, oh, interesting, okay, yeah, now I'm going to get involved. Like,
Yeah.
like you take like his story, the story where he helps find the missing cook, and the woman, the client literally insults him for not wanting to take the case, being like, oh, I suppose it doesn't matter for the little people, and if it's not of national importance. And then he's like, well, it's clearly of national importance to you, so what do you say we look at this case? You know.
And another thing that I love about this whole dynamic is how he's got such a perfect full circle character arc, because the villain Ratigan basically has a near victory because of setting him up.
Yeah, and I love how they even make references in the movie calling Ratigan the Napoleon of crime, which was obviously taking a little tip of the hat to Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes.
Because Moriarty was called the Professor of Crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also in some versions he was also called the Napoleon of crime as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that moment, it has one of my favorite calling the hero out moments, when you see Basil and Dawson in the trap. One of the best Rube Goldberg traps ever.
Yeah. I mean, if I have any critique of this film, it's just the fact that Ratigan's clearly inspired by Moriarty, but it doesn't feel like they brought in some of Moriarty's character stuff for Ratigan. Like, I noticed that he needed a lot of outside help to pull off his schemes, which is something that Moriarty really didn't need, because Moriarty was a lot of people forget he's actually a mathematician.
Yeah.
He was a math professor.
Yeah.
You gotta give credit to Fidget, though. That little bastard was...
that is one of the most put upon henchmen I think I've ever seen.
And competent, too. How often is it that the Candy Candido comic relief character does so much shit? He gets Flaversham and Olivia.
Mm-hmm.
He gets all the stuff together, all the parts, and he's actually scary and funny in equal measure.
Yeah, and what the fuck did Ratigan do? He set up a death trap and grandstanded, but he didn't do much besides that.
Hey. He pressed the record to vinyl. You realize how expensive that is?
I don't even want to know how hard that is for a mouse. A mouse, not a rat. Not a rat, just to be clear.
We'll get to Ratigan eventually, because that's going to be a whole 5 minutes unto itself. But we got to talk about him eventually. But getting back to that scene, that part where Dawson calls him out when he's in the middle of feeling bad for himself for being tricked.
Yeah, and it triggers a Sherlock Holmes moment. Just that one little incidental line where it's like, wait a minute,
Set it off now.
Yeah.
And that's perfect.
Yeah.
And the animation is great all around, especially especially at the climax, which again we will elaborate on. I'm gonna say that a lot, I'm sorry, but the expressions are so on point. And
well, it helps that this film was the last film effort from the original Disney animation team.
yeah,
It was a collaboration between the people that would herald on the Disney Renaissance and the people who brought Disney into the public eye in Golden Age. So you had the best of the best collaborating on a single film.
Yep. And I think it reminds me a lot. Basil's animation, especially with the facial expressions, works to his characterization so well, because a character like him, it benefits greatly from his expressiveness.
Oh, yeah.
You see
Absolutely. Because the thing I was going to mention is, like, there's certain scenes in the movie where he goes through, like, 5 facial expressions in, like, 5 seconds. And it's such a nice detail to see, where you can see, like, what, like, the clock ticking in his head of, like, okay, this is what's happening, this is what's happening, this is what's happening, and all in, like, a few seconds.
And it very much reminds me, too, even the emotional scenes have those moments where you see him processing things. It reminds me a lot of how they handled the Beast's expressions in Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah.
Which, like, something that I think goes under-examined when people talk about that movie is just how expressive the Beast is in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, Daulton, have you ever noticed how the Beast really contorts his face around? Like, when Belle is healing him, and, like, where she's trying to, you know, nurse his wounds, he's like, that hurts! And she's like, if you stayed still, it wouldn't hurt as much. And he comes up with a comeback, and he's like, if you hadn't run away, this wouldn't have happened. And he's got this smug-ass grin on his face.
Yeah.
And when she calls him out on being kind of a temperamental jackass, he's like, he's contorting his face like, oh, shit. You should have stayed on the West Wing.
Yeah.
And they do a lot of similar stuff for Basil here, too, where, as Erin had said, there's his planning moments, and then when it takes time for him to realize that he has been kind of a jackass, he has those stammering moments where there's visible confusion on his face.
Yeah. And, you know, I actually forgot there were... I had a little more Disney in my childhood than I realized, mostly because of my aunts. They drove my grandparents and my parents up the wall because of their obsession with Aladdin. They played the Aladdin. They had like the Aladdin soundtrack, and were always playing it and stuff like that. And I saw Aladdin and The Little Mermaid quite a few times as a child, as well, but not as much as Batman or The Lion King.
Dude, I must have worn out Lilo and Stitch so much when I was little.
Same.
Like,
for me, between my sister and I, we went through about 4 copies, VHS copies, and also like cassette tapes and records of Winnie the Pooh and Mary Poppins.
Both great movies, the pair of them.
Yeah, because I had the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh on vinyl, and I'm pretty sure my mom said she had to get a second vinyl because the first one we wore out.
That tracks.
Yep.
And my sister went through 3 copies of Mary Poppins, and 2 VHS tapes, and 2 VHS tapes on my part. So yeah, like, all of this stuff from, like, 10 and 5-year-old me. And my sister.
Getting a bit back to The Great Mouse Detective, something I also like is that this movie is a family movie, but in the broadest sense, because, like, yeah, the kids can watch this and be fine. Like, it's not like, like I said, it's not like a gritty effort on Disney's part. This isn't Atlantis the Lost Empire, for instance.
Well, another thing I was going to mention is that this movie also kind of uses the Don Bluth philosophy, which is kids can handle anything if you attach a happy ending. Which tracks with Don Bluth's movies.
Like, I kind of disagree with them because, like, not in a bad way, but American Tail is so friggin' bleak.
Oh, it is.
Like,
it definitely is.
Dalton, have you seen that one? American Tail.
American Tail. No, I haven't.
That shit is a...
It's gonna make you cry a lot.
It is a brutal immigration struggle story disguised as a Happy Mouse movie.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
You would be surprised, like, how weird rating systems were. Like, it was literally because of, like, a few, like, movies that's like, wait, this is a PG in the 80s that they had to, like, implement, like, the PG-13 rating.
Yeah.
Most famously, Temple of Doom was, like, the big Kickstarter for that.
Was the PG-13 catalyst. But it's funny because Bluth, it's funny, Erin, that you brought him up. Mm-hmm. Because he actively was aware of rating systems, and for arguably his best movie, The Secret of Nim, he was consciously trying to go into PG territory.
Yeah.
He's like, we gotta get out of G rating. There's a moment where Mrs. Brisby in that movie gets stuck or trapped, and you can hear Justin go, "Damn!" And there's a part where she's visibly bleeding because she cut herself on a paperclip.
There's also the scene in The Secret of Nem where you see like the animals in the lab being like tortured and distorted and all that shit.
And being thrown down the drain of the sewer.
I mean, for reference, just for how weird rating systems were, do you know what film to this day is rated PG because it was technically the rating they gave it when it came out?
Poltergeist?
Yes, but
I was gonna say Poltergeist.
Night of the Living Dead.
Oh my god.
That's a PG rated film.
Oh, you wanna know what's a G rated film?
What?
Jesus Christ Superstar.
Okay. I just love the fact that a movie where you can see corpses eating guts is a PG rating.
Like,
Or seeing Judas hang himself from a tree.
like,
A film where an undead girl picks up a trowel and is about to murder her mother with it, and we see the silhouette of the murder occurring. PG rating.
and the hero fucking dies. He walks up.
One of the final shots of the movie is a clear headshot of the main character.
Like, it's funny too because Roger Ebert did a whole thing where he was recounting an experience of that movie being screened, and keep in mind this was when horror movies got screened to kids. Like, you know, you got stuff like The Wolfman and Frankenstein. Kids could see that.
Well, it got more commodified for kids in the 50s because of, like, the comedian horror film craze that happened for a while there. All those Abbott and Costello movies.
And then this movie came out. Roger Ebert was detailing kids coming into the movie, having fun, seeing the zombies and stuff.
Yeah, horror was being marketed more for kids. Even look at TV, Monsters, like Addams Family.
And then Ben dies at the end, and he remembered there was a beat, and then just a chorus of blubbering kids.
Oh, yeah.
Who were, like, so taken aback by that. Great movie, by the way.
Oh, fantastic. It like... That film is one of the first films that has like a positive portrayal of a black protagonist, and the black protagonist is the hero of the film unquestionably.
I would not be surprised at all if George Romero's characterization for Ben ended up informing Lee Everett from The Walking Dead.
I wouldn't be surprised either. And also a lot of the stuff for and what I love is George Romero said he didn't go out of his way to make like a racial statement with the film. Like, he chose the actor who played Ben because he was the best actor for the part. And the racial stuff came in just by the tones of the time and how he played the character.
Yeah. But I like how it worked out, because that in its own way is a nice stand against the standards of the time.
Yeah, and of like racial discrimination and profiling as well. Like, that film is more timely and present today than it was even back then, you know?
And like I said, that kind of loops back around to how much kids can take, because The Great Mouse Detective does keep in a lot of... It does have like a slight edge to it that it borrowed from the Victorian mysteries that it's homaging. Like
the Penny Dreadfuls.
Yeah, and there's even like kind of like references to racial profiling in this. Rattigan hates being called a rat because rats are clearly discriminated against compared to mice.
Yeah, like there you can almost you could almost make a comparison to how An American Tale references the discrimination against Italians and Irish people,
And Jews. And Jewish people.
And Jewish people.
Immigrants of like at the turn of the century, you know.
Yeah, and it's funny too because you might not notice immediately unless you're looking for it, but Flaversham and his daughter Olivia clearly Scottish.
Yeah.
And like you can kind of sense the whole parallels going on with how they were portrayed in those stories, and also how this movie kind of subverts some expectations you have about Scottish characters.
Yeah, no, I and you know, honestly, I think this has one of my favorite more understated Disney scores. You know, like it's not focused on the music as much as other Disney movies are. It doesn't rely on the music as much as the other ones. But the music does a great job with the dressing and piecing of the film, and it's very fun.
Like, and that I think will bring us to the climax in Big Ben.
Yes, so you can see how excited I am about this.
Her face lit up, guys.
So the climax of the film is basically kind of like a fight scene, but not like a generic, like a Disney standoff between Ratigan and Basil, and you see Dawson and Mr. Flaversham and Olivia all trying to help out, but Olivia kind of gets in the way a couple times.
And she's caught in Big Ben, and there's a great like suspense shot where she's tossed aside onto one of the moving gears.
On one of the moving cogs, and then like the cogs start to turn to like almost crush her, and then Basil just grabs her.
Yeah, he yanks one of the chains from inside the clock tower and rides it all the way up to catch her, which culminates in one of the best villain breakdowns ever.
Oh yeah, you can see how Ratigan's face just kind of like distorts and that kind of thing, because like his eyes go all crazed and that kind of thing, because he's losing.
Yep, his bargaining chip is gone. He's seeing Basil run with a smile on his face, and the criminal gentleman facade drops. Like, he's not trying to put on a show anymore, and he goes feral, chasing them all the way through the inner workings of Big Ben, and just single-mindedly just chasing.
And the other thing I was going to mention is, since Richie mentioned how Ratigan basically goes feral, you can see him starting to lose more and more of his clothing while he's going. And you just see like this feral-looking street rat just running around these cogs and gears and all this stuff inside a clock tower.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's less of a fight sequence and more of a chase sequence.
Oh yeah.
More of a chase sequence than a fight sequence, to be honest. I was just using the wrong term.
No, I was only like thinking about that as like I was like reflecting on it. You know, it's like if anything, it's more of like a chase sequence. Like it's a pretty interesting case, because like you can see like how physically imposing Ratigan is compared to the heroes. So instead of it logistically being a fight sequence, it becomes more of a chase sequence. You know?
Yeah.
Because it's not like Basil has any weapons on his hands at the time.
And
nor does he have any comrades.
Yeah.
Nope. And when it gets to the inner workings, as Erin alluded to, the computer animation making its debut in a grand Disney context is amazing.
It is, and I wanted
its debut though.
Not its debut.
No, because Disney, like we said, they don't like to talk about the Black Cauldron. Black Cauldron was actually Disney's first usage of computer animation.
Yeah.
Specifically for the boat.
Like, that's great, but here, they've clearly perfected it. And you couldn't tell unless you were looking back at it like we are, because those cogs blend in so well with the hand-drawn backgrounds and the characters.
It does, because sometimes when you see early computer animation in films, it either looks plastic, or it looks like it makes the backdrop look like a matte painting.
Yeah.
Or like one of those blue screen effects from Fraggle Rock.
Yeah, or it looks something like, or it looks just like almost alien because of how unlike our modern techniques it is, like Tron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, I'd say it works better to Tron's advantage in that case.
Exactly.
Because, like, it does really contribute to having a look of its own.
You know, a lot of people think another early instance of computer animation exists in a film that actually isn't, which is another film that would be great to cover on the show if we hadn't already seen it. Escape from New York.
Oh.
Yeah, that, oh, you haven't seen Escape from New York?
No.
oh, we can do Escape from New York.
Hey!
But that sequence where they're outlining Snake's mission and like they show like, you know, like the plane models and all that stuff, you'd think that's done with computers. No, that was all model work, because you have to remember it was like the end of the 70s and John Carpenter did not have a lot of money at this point, so computers were very, very, very expensive back then. So they just did models and filmed models and made it look like it was a computer.
That's some Star Wars shit there.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
So, that climax is great. The animation's awesome. The score, like Daulton said, in that particular moment is great because it kind of syncs up with the sound of the clock ticking, but not perfectly, which works.
Yeah.
They aren't Mickey Mousing it. Pardon me. And they aren't Mickey Mousing it like they do in Baby Driver, but it syncs up just well enough to punctuate the action going on. Almost as if the clocks are the percussion in the chase.
Yeah. Part of me wonders if maybe the reason this film isn't as prolific as it is because apparently the old men at Disney hated this movie.
Maybe?
Now I'm sad.
Yeah, because like everyone, yeah, because they I was looking up some stuff. They actually hated this movie, and it was more of a project of the younger people of Disney. Like the older people at Disney worked on it, but the younger people were more passionate about it.
That kind of tracks considering Jeffrey Katzenberg and
they were all like, "No, Black Cauldron's more important. We got to focus on the Black Cauldron," you know.
Which is funny considering that. Even as obscure as this movie is in a Disney sense, it still outranks the Black Cauldron.
Yeah. And not only that, but the crazy thing is, apparently part of the reason they had so much anger over this film is because everyone hated the title, and there was a bunch of infighting in the studio over the title, and a bunch of like bitchy like, oh, I can't believe you're going with that title sort of stuff, you know.
The working title was just Basil of Baker Street, but honestly...
And everyone was like, The Gray Mouse Detective, that's a stupid title. Which, I mean, I get where they're coming from. Apparently this is not this was one of the first times this happened at Disney. Wasn't the last time. There was a bunch of fighting over the titles for Tangled and Frozen as well.
Ah, yes. That...
The one-word title.
Yeah.
The era of the one-word title was kicked off by this conundrum.
And, you know, I will agree with the Frozen one. They were going to go with the original title of the work it was based off of. It was going to be called The Snow Queen originally.
Yeah, that would have been better.
Yeah, it's a more elegant title. And then you wouldn't have the whole mix-up of having the same name as a horror film.
True story.
Yeah, within only like a year or two of Frozen coming out, like a year or two before, there was a horror film called Frozen. Good film. Very underrated. Harrowing and very scary because it's like one of those horror films that's just like super realistic, which is just like, hey, what would you do if you were trapped in an incredibly realistic and terrifying situation? For those unaware, the film is just about people getting stuck on a ski lift late at night.
Winter horror is underrepresented, and I wouldn't mind seeing this for the podcast, honestly.
Yeah, I mean...
I've seen bits of it, but that's because it was showing on, like, some not streaming service. It was showing on some premium channel when I was in, I want to say high school or a little after high school. I think it was showing on, like, Stars or something.
Ah, yeah, it came out in 2010. It was the work of Adam Green, the director who's most well known for the Hatchet slasher films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I've seen Hatchet.
It's not good.
It's not great.
And getting back a bit to the climax, part of the reason why the Fallout works so well is Radigan being the perfect antagonist for this sort of story.
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, as Daulton said, he's not a one-to-one Moriarty clone, but who the frig cares about that when he's just so fun? He is so fun. It's... What can I meaningfully say about it? It's Vincent Price, hamming it up in a recording booth, clearly having the time of his fucking life.
It's Vincent Price having a good time. What more do you need?
He sings, he giggles in between, gleefully discussing how he's going to basically murder his opposition.
Yeah.
And there's just such a panache to him and a zeal to him that, honestly, I kind of wish they brought back to Disney villains. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Ratigan laid down the framework for villains like, say, Hades or Ursula or hell, even Jafar.
Yeah.
With how they animate his anger and his happier moments of his charismatic chess master moments.
And another thing I appreciate about this movie is, well, especially about Ratigan, is that at the beginning of the movie, when you first see what's going on, you're not 100% sure what his major plan is. And I feel like that's a really good touch, because usually when you see in a lot of movies, it's like, oh, here's my big plan. I'm like, we're 15 minutes into the movie.
Yeah.
They kind of build it up.
Yeah. They build it up, and I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, it's a little silly, but...
Yeah.
But it's a kid's movie.
It's a kid's movie.
Yeah.
Kid's movie, and also...
It fits the tone they're going for.
Fits the tone, which is semi-serious mystery mixed with slapstick.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I really do appreciate the edge, because this guy feeds people to his cat.
Yeah, and, you know, I like how, like, you wonder at first, you're just like, hey, what would a evil mouse villain need with a toy maker? And, you know, that's already interesting, you know?
And then they go to the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, and they unwrap the present.
Yeah.
And you're either confused or laughing. In my case, both. It's like, okay. Like, this is both perfect and completely unexpected. It's just, it's awesome.
It is. Do either of you guys have anything else to say about this?
I do.
You do? Okay.
One thing I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to bring up in the midst of this was how dedicated it was to that tonal balance, complete with actually some pretty accurate chemistry that goes on.
Oh yeah, you were mentioning that when we were watching it.
The device that Basil uses looks like the sort of pH acid scale that was used by chemists of the Victorian era. Like, and they burn the list that Fidget was carrying, which is covered in salt water that was in the sewers that he's from, and they run it through a tube where the water kind of is heated and distilled before being run into a beaker full of what the movie tells me is silver nitrate. Yeah. And the reaction is similar to what devices would indicate salinity with back then. And I appreciate those touches, because it kind of makes me wish for the days where quote unquote kids or family movies had that
some bit of science in it.
Some bit of science and some bit of knowledge that, hey, parents have to see this too. Mm-hmm. And, like, it's stuff, it's intelligence like that we need. We don't need one-off poop or sex jokes or adult jokes that get past the radar. Because, honestly, that's so played out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I honestly don't have much else to say about this that wouldn't just be retreading things that I've already said, but, you know, like we established, yeah, this was a nice, pleasant little surprise for me, and I really enjoyed my time with this film.
Yay!
I am counting down the days where I can cover the other two movies that I had suggested in the Twitter poll. Those days will come, but I'm glad that you guys who voted picked this one, because, like, most of our material is pretty dark, and the other two movies, Dead Man and Ghost Dog, are dark, even though they are a lot of fun. So this was a nice, breezy little
Phone drop.
Yep. Oh well.
phone drop in the background that I am so glad that we were part of.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you just need something lighter. Like,
You know, which
Yeah.
makes me think. I wonder if we're going to be continuing on a bit of a light-hearted streak, which now that we're wrapping up here at Killer Score, I think it's time to pass it over to Miss Murray, considering that she has the next pick.
oh, does she?
Okay. So this film is a bit of light and dark. It has some dark moments in it, but it's mostly a lighthearted, very cute film. And considering it is French, I'm going to do a little something for you French speakers out there, if I can get my phone to work. Dans le prochain épisode de Killer Score, nous regarderons le film français de 2001 Amélie avec Audrey Tautou. Merci pour votre écoute et nous espérons vous voir la prochaine fois. Bonne nuit!